Welcome to the Predictive World series brought to you by SalesChoice, which specializes in achieving revenue certainty. I'm your host, Jen Yim. I'm the Senior Director of Product here at SalesChoice, where we bring three services powered by our AI platform to market. We have Sales Insights, which helps sales professionals with guided insights. We have Mood Insights, which connects frontline voices to leadership. And third is our AI and data services, where we design, build, and maintain AI models. Over the years, we've been hosting numerous experts and thought leaders on AI and revenue growth, and we've built a trove of podcasts, webinars, white papers, and more. And I direct our listeners to go to saleschoice.com/resources to access that. But today I have with us Lisa Falzone. Lisa, can you give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. So I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, California, and I started my first company when I was 25. And I started it because I was working on an ordering app, trying to integrate into point of sale systems. Through doing that, I realized that the restaurant owners hated their point of sale systems. That was right when Steve Jobs had just announced the iPad. And so we put two and two together and said, let's create the next generation point of sale system on the iPad. And so started that in 2010, grew it for 7 years, raised over $100 million, and grew it to 700 employees and grew it to about a $500 million valuation and exited to private equity. Then I took a couple years off and I started having children, and I realized that for what I wanted to do next was really make the world safer for my kids and for all the other children out there, and I was just really horrified by what was going on in the news with these school shootings. And so wanted to create technology to help prevent that. And so that's how we founded Athena Security.
Wow, that's an amazing path. And I'm excited to hear a bit more about Athena specifically.
Yeah, so Athena started out doing visual light weapon detection. So we detect when someone pulls out a weapon through CCTV cameras. Um, and And then we send that alert to whoever the client wants, whether it's a security officer or the head of security. And so that was our first product. But through doing that, we kept getting requests like, that's really cool, but I want to actually prevent the crime. And I really want concealed weapon detection. So to detect when someone comes in with this concealed weapon where they're not supposed to be. So after a while, we pivoted to concealed weapon detection in 2022 and really haven't looked back. And currently we're doing we're stopping about 1,000 weapons from going into buildings every single month. Our big verticals are actually healthcare, casinos, and then schools. I had no idea, but in healthcare, nurses are assaulted more every single day than police officers. So it's a really big problem. And being able to take out, weapons from the ER really makes the care providers feel a lot safer.
Wow,
So yeah.
that's a huge difference that you're making. I'm going to turn
Thank
it over
you.
to our Dr. Cindy Gordon to start the
Yeah.
conversation.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jennifer and Lisa. Welcome. And, I didn't know the risks for nurses either. I mean, that is something that should be far more visible. So whatever we can do with our networks in Canada, let's talk further because we've
Mhm.
got a footprint up here. There's no question that our nurses really need that protection. So thank you for sharing that. Well, I think these days, we both know, and one of the reasons we really wanted to talk to you is there's so much opportunity in the analytics that you're collecting. And no doubt,
Mhm.
with your maturity and your success, you are solving some of the challenges on risk detection or intrusion using some AI methods. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about with your business model and what you're comfortable to share in terms of how you're using AI to really increase, not just the analytics, but maybe other detection methods or looking at broader ecosystems as well.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit more background about our product. So currently it's a hardware and software solution. It's two poles and then two iPads. And the one iPad actually looks at the polls, and we use AI to detect if someone is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So, for example, we use AI to detect if someone is trying to evade the metal detector or the polls. So we would detect that. We also use AI to make sure the security officers are doing their jobs correctly. We use AI, for example, to make sure they're doing, from the Department of Homeland Security, they have a list of recommendations. And one of the recommendations for like a secondary screen is making sure that they do that U shape correctly when they do the secondary screen. So if they don't do that correctly, then we would also send an alert. So we help automate and protect more people through our AI.
Understood. So you'd be using mainly image processing techniques
Mhm.
where you've got patterning recognition of what the right behaviors are supposed to be, and then you detect anomalies, but then also analytics. Was it a hard technology to develop to get the quality of the precision on the imaging classification sides and the accuracy, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, our initially with our initial product, yeah, it was really hard to get all that data. So for example, like a lot of times it does look very similar.
Hmm.
The a gun versus or a weapon versus like a book or someone pulling out a book. So we had to do all these different, we basically hired actors and had them, create all that data.
Got it. So when you think about it, you actually have a data set that, in
Mhm.
fact, is another asset,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That
Yeah.
just
Yeah. And then we've expanded. We've expanded to do, even object detection, for example, base off. We also include an X-ray system. So a lot of times if, a hospital or a school wants to be extra safe, they'll have the two poles and then they'll have an X-ray system next to it. And so we have all that data set also from the X-ray system. And then we send an alert if a weapon goes through
yeah.
also with the X-ray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what does it cost? I know that wasn't one of the questions, but I'm just curious what kind of range? I mean, because obviously
Mhm.
you're dealing with schools, they're not going to have a lot of budget, other
Yeah.
organizations will. So are there government subsidies or, just how is all that working to get what's so needed into the market, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, so there's grants, different school grants, even hospitals can get grants. So, but we charge about 25 to $30,000 per year per system, per entryway.
Per entryway. Okay, that's
Mhm.
what's really, really critical, right? So it's the doorways into the actual facilities that are, where the devices are set up.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Got
put everything towards the choke point, which is, yeah, at an entryway. So,
it.
and then we can also integrate to access control. So if someone does detect a gun, it can lock, or a weapon, it can lock down the doors.
And then is there, it's hard for me with my our analytics and AI background. Are you thinking about where you've got a penetration, you actually have an entire zone that's now increased its safety by a factor. So, one is doubling down on particular schools in a particular neighborhood where there's multiple devices set up. Um,
Mhm.
is that kind of been something that the patterning is happening where you can say, you know what, we have all of California locked down in a more efficient with all these school districts, or you sell at the school district level? I'm just really curious.
Oh, like if they're like seeing like a citywide
Yeah,
like
get the whole
violence
grid.
going down. Well, we're not we're not that big yet, but like for example, like we're deployed in major hospital chains and they can say, hey, like the security officers can say, or the head of security can say, now they can take to their upper management and say, hey, we detected 500
Yeah,
weapons. This is how great our security team is doing. And so now they have all that data and analytics, whereas before they didn't have it or were just kind of like writing it down on spreadsheets
yeah. And you
or like
think,
a notepad
yeah,
next to the detector.
and you think about the lives that you don't know, but the odds
Right.
are right. And if you looked at the patterns on safety for nurses, they're going to get to your earlier point, they're going to feel incredibly safe, and even the teachers, right? And well, just
Right.
kudos to you. What a story of corporate purpose that has value, right? And so
Oh,
neat.
thank you.
Absolutely, no question. You're a rock star.
Oh,
Let's shift a little bit to, in the sense of the current state, and you probably are well aware that there's gaps in legislation, responsible AI. California, as an exception, has been putting in some wonderful legislation. But as work across other geos and the fact that we don't have, that consistency in place, because in your situation, you're bringing value. The solution itself isn't, I wouldn't consider it high risk. It's of high value, but the solution,
yeah.
it's not like, you're building a diagnostic robot, right? That's going to operate on me, which I would consider as high risk. Or, but what are your
Right.
thoughts in the sense of what's happening with, the U.S. legislation and the back and forth, and the concerns about the states are, different states are putting in their own unique legislation and creating more complexities, and but what's the kind of buzz? Because always the Valley always has a good point of view, so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, I mean, I think you're right. I think that if there were more regulations, we would probably be classified as high risk, misclassified as high risk. So overall, like, I'm not for, overall, I'm like not for more regulations because I think they could potentially stifle innovation. And I think that companies really need to be operating responsibly. Otherwise, I don't think consumers should, buy their product. So, I mean, our whole premise is developing, creating AI for good and to really help, save people's lives. So our whole mission is to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And with my background in AI and law, et cetera, there's no question your solution isn't high risk. It's high value, right?
Right.
To my earlier point. And, it's more the bad actors that we need to worry about. We've had more solutions that are thinking like you are. Um, let's move to the next one in the sense of maybe sharing some of the challenges that you see to more rapidly scale. Obviously, there's always capital infusion, et cetera. But
Mhm.
how dense are the competitors in the environment? Because there's inevitably a few out there, right? And how you see the overall space and opportunities and maybe product differentiation, but just to get a few perspectives on the evolution of your business model and how you want to scale.
Yeah. Well, so my last company with Revel Systems, it got very competitive very quickly, and there was just a ton of venture capital thrown into the market. And so we were competing with other companies that were giving their product away for free, basically. With this company, it's different. There isn't actually a lot of venture capital in this space, which I actually think is a blessing because then we can actually charge enough to keep everything going and have it be sustainable, versus just kind of plowing through like venture capital dollars. So, there is competitors, but they're sort of kind of like doable because they're also trying to be profitable companies. They're not just they haven't just raised a ton of money and, are trying to, create, get as many clients as possible for free and then monetize on something else later. So yeah, it's a hardware solution. We're dealing with, weapons, which some people see as risky. So it's competitive, but it's not like overwhelmingly so.
And is most of the innovations that you see in the competitive landscape within the US, or, obviously these problems are global in nature, right?
Yeah, the problems are global, but it's worse in the US just because the Second Amendment and, everyone has weapons in the US. So, in Canada, UK, Australia, there's like knives are a bigger deal. So, and you're still getting violence in the ER, but yeah, it's definitely more US focused.
Okay, so you're really doubling down on the US coverage as
Mhm.
fast as you can, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. It's always interesting to hear, right? And when you mentioned knives, are you starting to look at the image processing to detect knives as well? Have you?
Yes.
Okay, is that okay? So is that built or is that on the roadmap to, expand the different artifacts that you might want to, detect?
Yeah, so a client can choose whether they want like a higher throughput, so more people going through the system, or, and in that scenario, we would detect a handgun or above. So a
Mhm,
knife that would be bigger than a handgun, but we're not going to catch like this really small, really small knives. And so if a client's number one concern is, all right, they've gotten a threat, they can lock down the system and then make it a slower throughput, but then they're going to detect even just like a needle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the size is another one. I guess you think, yeah, there's lots of things you could think here creatively, but I would be spending far much of your valuable time as I think outside the box. Let's go to the next question. In the Valley, I was looking at Y Combinator, and you probably have your ear to the ground there too. And a lot of the investments are going
Mhm.
in Agentic AI applications. And you're in a situation where you could say, you know what, I want in our entire company to really be AI internal as well. So I was just curious on how you're approaching those possibilities. Are you building solutions to really, experiment with agentic AI, or it's just, it's on the sidelines?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we've been experimenting with lately is like um a hologram officer. You're not putting the officer in harm's way, and the officer actually is like a hologram. And so part of that can be, and we're experimenting right now with that entryways. And so, for example, if an officer is constantly like, okay, here, where's the bathroom? It's over here, take a left, or be in this line versus that line. Stop if we see that you have a weapon. So we're experimenting with that. It's kind of like a combination of and also then you can tap in a real life security officer. So we are experimenting with that. It's a little bit like we might be a little bit too early. I'm not sure that people are ready for that, but I definitely think it's the future, and I think that we have to use automation and help, whether it's a security officer or if it's, my internal employees, use automation to make your life easier, safer, and then also more creative.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation going on with Samsung if you haven't already thought about that, right? With Neon, etc. But
Mhm.
I do think you're absolutely right in the sense of, ensure that a human's not positioned in harm, right? And there's other ways that you could address it. Very, very interesting. And kudos to you. I think that, I think China's probably ready for some of these things too, maybe a little bit
Yeah,
faster because they've been working with hologram technologies and for quite a while,
yeah,
right? Cool.
exactly.
Really, really interesting. Now, what about on the internal operations? Like right now, we're talking about product innovation, but in terms of the internal infrastructure, like are you using, OpenAI or Gemini? Some organizations say we're going to, just go with the Google stack. How are you really ensuring that your employees have all the relevant toolkits? Like, are you using Salesforce CRM or HubSpot or, like, because they all are really everybody's now saying we're advancing to agentic, whether they are or not, but it's the latest buzz.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, we use all of the above. I mean, I always encourage my employees to use GDP, Gemini. I also we use, Salesforce, HubSpot, and you're right. I mean, all these vendors are using AI and are using it in some form or another, or whether it's a startup. I mean, there's there's still like a lot of work to do, in my opinion, with a lot of these technologies. I mean, I find that, I know that, for example, our PR person will use ChatGPT to create a press release, but then I feel like I spend more time editing that press release than it would have been just to create it without AI. So, I mean, I think we're using AI when we can, but I think for coding and that kind of stuff, it's like not fully there yet.
Yeah, Lisa, you're so right. And I don't know if you saw the release that came out of MIT. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and it was doing brain scans of cognitive skills of humans in the utilization of ChatGPT, and how they were quite concerned that we were being dumbed down and that we weren't using the right muscles in terms of. So some really interesting scientific research. There's a whole body of concern on the critical thinking because we don't have the balance yet, and we're trying to figure out the balance, right? And
Yeah.
how important it is for the humans that really have the expertise, or the tacit knowledge too, right? The that's not as visible to come into the equation, and but also not to ensure that we don't get lazy. And that was really what this research. If you haven't seen it, I can flip over a link later. It was quite fascinating. There's been lots
Yeah,
of
that'd be great.
research circles on it. Um, Now, in an organization, and you know what it's like to all of a sudden be scaling as fast as you can and
Mhm.
trying to keep your ear to the ground. Is your workforce distributed, or is everybody concentrated in one location? What's the structure there, and how are you keeping everybody connected in terms of social listening? Just curious on that front.
Yeah, so we are pretty much work from home. We do have a couple of offices. Personally, I sort of miss being at the office. I like being around people. As far as social listening, we don't do too much of it, but in my last company, I did sort of a form of social listening where basically we had these employee reviews, and then they could also review the company as well. So just to kind of get, and then I'd have it all summarized. So just to get some feedback on like what people were thinking, and then I would allow it to be anonymous if they wanted, but if it was anonymous, it had to be constructive. So like what could we actually do to make things better versus just like general complaints or something like that. So I think I'll probably implement something like that going forward as we grow. But right now we're about 60 people, so it's
Manageable.
yeah, manageable.
Yeah, no, it's great that you've got the sensitivity as a leader to listen to the voices, and you already know how important it is to send out those signals that you care, right? And
Mhm.
just there's just been a whole body of research on gratitude and kindness, and how important it is, especially with the geopolitical dynamics we have, the uncertainty, the tariffs on and off again. It's
Right.
a conversation between our Canadian and US friends all the time, right? Um,
Totally.
so, as a CEO and founder, one of the things I always like to do in these podcasts, and you'll see if you've seen any other CEO interviews, is really to appreciate what are the three lessons that you've learned in your prior journey that you also are bringing into this business model. Maybe maybe you've capitalized things more yourself. I don't know. That's often a course which people do when they're in that position. But what are the top three lessons that you've learned that you think others can really benefit from, Lisa?
Oh, it's a good question. So from my last company to this company, I think one of the things that the first thing that comes to my mind is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I I had to deal with like pretty severe burnout in my last company. So I really think that this time I'm just trying to make it more manageable. And I think having a win the first time has given me more confidence, which allows me to make it more manageable. So I think as a founder, like just managing your whole life so you can be in it in the long run. So that'd be my number one advice is to manage manage the burnout. And then number two, like I think that I would get kind of sucked up into, oh, this person's raising all this money, and I think that money is like how much money you raise isn't necessarily like isn't is like a short-term win, but it's not necessarily like the long-term win. So kind of keeping myself in my own lane and try not to, look at, oh, this person's doing this or this company is doing this and kind of being competitive about it and sort of just like running my own race. Um, and then third, I mean, I think I just really learned the first time I made a lot of hiring mistakes because I was new at it and I had never really hired people before, but now I've hired a ton of people, and so I think I'm just a lot better at hiring and creating the team.
Yeah, talent is, as you know, everything. I remember when I was a venture capitalist and I was at a meeting, it was in New York, and we were talking to the other VCs, and it was interesting to hear the different perspective, what they felt were the most important points as a successful VC. And there was only one other VC, I think, other than yours truly, because I'm a real people person. They said, number one rule of thumb is talent. Rule number two is talent. Number three.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, to your point, the business model can evolve, but you need the talent and have to have the confidence to speak up. And as CEO, you have to have the courage to listen and to receive that feedback. And it's very, very important, right? The resiliency comes from the people DNA. And so many firms raise, as you know, a ton of capital and just absolutely waste it all. Like they don't get anything,
Mhm.
never, they don't have the tightness in the product market fit or the right people at the table, right? But so yeah, it's you're well on your way with an incredible business model that only has tremendous growth potential. So just again, want to just say thank you for the
Oh,
sharing.
thank you.
I'll turn it back to Jennifer to do wrap-up comments, but certainly have inspired us. We all love our children, and we love our nurses. And we need to
Mhm.
make this world a whole lot safer, and it's not safe right now. So congratulations for such a noble cause. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks, Lisa. It was a pleasure to connect today, and I invite our listeners to join us again at saleschoice.com/resources and to join us next time for more insights in the AI world.